Hello and welcome to the Imprint Weekly Podcast. I'm John Kelly, senior editor of The Imprint, a daily news site covering child welfare and youth justice around the country. You can read all of our coverage at imprintnews.org or check us out on Facebook or Twitter at The Imprint News. You can also sign up on our homepage for our free weekly and monthly newsletters. And for professionals in child welfare and youth justice, subscribe to our Youth Services Insider section for a closer look at news on business policy and practice. The Imprint Weekly Podcast is also a member of the SafeCamp Audio Network. You can check out our show page and all of SafeCamp's other great podcasts at safecampaudio.org on the web or at SafeCamp Audio on social media. On today's episode, we are joined by David Mohammed, who is the founder and executive director of the National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform, to talk about high-risk, hard-to-reach youth, or HR squared, which is a term he and fellow justice reformer Vinny Schiraldi have coined to describe the relatively small group of youth they believe should be the focus of the next phase of youth justice reform. Me and David start by talking a little bit about his organization, which turns 10 years old this year, and their experience with the funding cuts to youth justice programs last year by the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. And then we get into HR squared. So what are the defining characteristics of a young person in this group? How do you identify them? What are the ideas for reaching them? It's a very interesting framing and focus given the context of youth justice right now. We've gone through decades of decline in the number of kids who are being locked up, either in detention centers or after they've been adjudicated. There's been a very consistent decline in youth arrests. But in some states, we're seeing more recently a move legislatively or in policy towards more punitive solutions for youth accused or adjudicated for serious offenses. So without further ado, here is our conversation with David Mohammed. All right, we are joined today by David Mohammed, founder and executive director of the National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform, to talk about a new movement of sorts, I guess I'll say, he has embarked on with fellow justice reformer Vinny Schiraldi to call for more attention to what they're calling high-risk, hard-to-reach youth, or HR squared, if you can't remember all of that, which in a recent policy brief, they say must be the focus of the next phase of youth justice reform. David, thanks for joining us on the Imprint Weekly Podcast.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Before we get into that serious topic, let's get these guys to know you a little bit. You got to give me house rules here. You got to give me at least one favorite. You can give me more if you want. Go 5 wide if you want. The categories are movie or TV show, musical group, book, or sports team. What do you got for them, David?
Oh, man. So a couple of things. I'll say sports team. I'm born and raised in Oakland, California, and we lost all of them. All of them. The A's, which I grew up going to $2 bleacher seats, where the A's with Ricky Henderson, who he and I went to the same high school. But then the Warriors, which I've always been a diehard Warrior fan, through the really hard decades in Nashville, we found gold and had.
I never really contemplated, I don't think, how particularly painful that is to have finally gotten to the promised land. And it's, by the way, we're going to just be across the river here.
No, it was extremely disrespectful. I mean, the one thing I'll say is I was in the building the only time that franchise ever won the championship when they were on their home floor. All the other championships they won on the road.
Very nice.
So that's a big one. And then the Raiders. Of all the 3 teams, I probably was most fanatical about the Raiders growing up because I played football, but that was just a huge loss. And so I'm still a big Warriors fan, even though I've got to travel to San Francisco to see them. But the A's I'm done with because that was a horrible way to go. And the Raiders, on top of moving, they've been horrific.
I will say, this is a weird piece of my sports fandom. I grew up in Connecticut. I live in Detroit now. So I'm definitely home. I love it when the people in my city are happy. So go Lions all day. I love watching them. But I grew up a Raiders fan because my first real memory of journalism was actually my parents getting me Sports Illustrated. And you know what, right? You used to come with something, like you get a phone or you get whatever.
Exactly. Yeah.
I got this video called Crunch Course, and it was just like all the big hitters and all that stuff.
I
And the
really
last
do.
5 minutes was Howie Long. And
Howie
I was
Long.
like, this is my guy. I love this dude. So I just became a Raiders fan, which
I
in
think Jack
retrospect,
Tatum is also on that, I
probably,
believe. Yeah,
probably.
yeah,
And LT was the other big
yeah,
one.
yeah.
But in retrospect, obviously, probably a pretty dumb decision. I live 2 hours from Foxborough. I live two
Right.
hours from where the Giants play. I could have been a championship fan, but it's okay. It's okay. We've had some fun as Raiders fans.
Yeah, Raider Nation is fun.
It's fun. Yeah, for sure. For sure. So we're coming up on 10 years, right? For the
Yeah.
National Institute of Criminal Justice Reform. Does that feel like you look back now? Is that like, wow, I can't believe it's already been 10 years? Or man, I can't believe we made it 10 years. Like, what do you feel?
Yeah, certainly some combination of the two.
Yeah.
The thing when I started, the intention was to be deliberately lean. And when I was the deputy commissioner of probation in New York City, I had 1,000 staff that reported up to me. When I was the chief probation officer in Oakland, I had 650 staff. I was looking forward to having a staff of 4. I failed at that. Obviously, that is often seen as a good thing. We're at nearly 40 people now,
Wow.
all across the country. And so that is great. I feel very happy about that. But that does mean I'd spend too much time on HR issues and org issues.
Yeah.
That being said, I'm excited about the work we're doing. And yeah, excited that we are at our 10-year mark.
Nice. You guys, if I remember correctly, got caught up in the whole Office of Juvenile Justice funding
Oh, yeah.
freeze situation. How did that play out for you guys? I think you had one project in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We
So what
ended up,
became of that?
we actually had 4
Oh, you
projects.
did.
And
Okay.
yeah. And so
Yeah.
a total of $5 million loss. It is, I actually tell this story a lot because I think it is both horrible about where we are in this country, but also we were pretty resilient. And so now one of those projects was nearly over. Another project, our team was really good at in between announcing that we're going in this direction and them cutting it off. We submitted a ton of invoices and they got paid. And so, but we also had been preparing for that eventual demise.
Yeah.
So we only lost one staff person, which a $5 million cut, only losing one staff person was pretty incredible. And even that staff person was moving on anyway, who was just recently announced as the closed Rikers czar for the Mondami
Dana
administration.
Kaplan.
Dana
Really?
Kaplan.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
Dana was the only
Okay.
person that we were going to have to lose because she was running all of our federally funded programs. That was what she was doing. And she landed pretty well. So the programs themselves were very frustrated with, but organizationally, we really were able to withstand a pretty big hit. And we want to thank philanthropy. One of the programs that we have, which was a learning community amongst youth justice agencies around what was called community-based alternatives to youth incarceration. We have it. It's not as robust, but we have reinitiated it called the Youth Justice Community of Practice, and the Annie E. Casey
Mm.
Foundation is funding it. And we took a big hit, but came out not unscathed, but pretty strong.
Yeah. That's good to hear. And that project you mentioned is probably a nice segue. I would imagine that's pretty relevant to what we're going to talk about today, which is high risk, hard to reach youth. So I think first, let me try to frame it. I've consumed a lot of the policy briefs, and I had a reporter go and see you guys talk at a recent conference. So I want to first download to you like how I see what you guys are talking about, and maybe you can poke holes if there need to be some or correct me. And then we'll get to actually defining who we're talking about here. But so this is what I drew from it all is that after decades of successful reform and also youth just committing or at least being arrested for less crimes, which is that we don't talk enough about.
Right.
Because adults in the room, good job, but like youth are just behaving. We have a fraction now of the kids we used to incarcerate in juvenile facilities and in adult facilities. It used to be north of 100,000. I think we're still below 30,000 now. The ones who remain, not all of them, but many, are in this high risk, hard to reach group you've coined the term on here. And if we want to engage them without incarcerating them, we have some work to do on developing and spreading the right interventions because they don't quite fit into many of the most established community programs that are out there right now. Is that about right? We're looking for a way to not have to incarcerate any or many of the young people we're about to talk about. So let's get to work on figuring out how we do it in the community.
Yeah, I think that is a really well done summary of what we're talking about. And these are young people who are the huge challenge to justice systems around the country. To your point, as we have reduced significantly, and we don't talk about it enough at all, as we have significantly reduced the overall youth justice population, youth incarceration population, who in many places, not everywhere, who we're primarily left with is this most challenging population, and we don't have good solutions for the most part. Obviously, we put forward some, but yes, that is what we're dealing with.
So, off of that, what would be a concise definition of high risk, hard to reach youth for listeners to take away from this?
Yeah, I think important is it's squared, it's both. There are a small number of high risk youth in any jurisdiction, particularly at the very top of that risk level. But some of those young people are responsive to programming. Then there are young people who are both very high risk and they're not responding to programming. And that is a challenging population. These are young people who have experienced significant trauma in their lives. They have experienced adverse childhood experiences. They've often had some acute, significant traumatic experience. They often have, because of those, some sort of mental health challenges, either abroad or might have an acute, serious mental health challenge, and have significant school absenteeism, school discipline issues, often may have stopped attending school, have significant arrests, and have been referred to numerous programs, and nothing, quote unquote, seems to be working. So this is the population, not the kid that gets arrested just for property damage or car theft or petty theft and once or twice. We're talking about a young person that has significant trauma and challenges in their life. Their families are significantly challenging and sometimes a part of the problem in the behavior. They have racked up some arrests and even serious arrests, and they have not responded to programming. And so these young people are a conundrum to the system.
Yeah, and that was a lot that David just dropped here. I will also drop in the show notes a link to a sort of policy brief that they put together that does lay this out in bulleted form. So you can see some of these characteristics that he's describing here. One that I wanted to get clarity on, because I was wondering it as I read through, was that last piece you mentioned, which is about having not succeeded in other programs. So is the right way to look at this is whatever other hallmarks or characteristics a youth presents with, to be in this group you're talking about, this HR squared group, we're really talking about youth who have not succeeded with other interventions. This is not a group where you would attempt a first primary intervention with. Is that right?
That's right. And I think that needs to be well understood because there are people, very good meaning people, either advocates or casual observers to this work, who will say, oh, that's the problem. We just need to not incarcerate and give them a program, get them traditional mentoring or some
Yeah.
multi-systemic therapy, which is intensive in-home family counseling, or evidence-based practices, which has been the movement of the youth justice system for many years. The issue is those things have not worked. And for a lot of the reason is they've never participated in it, right? So it may have worked if they ever were even responsive to it, right? And which I'm sure we'll get into in a moment is that's why what we are proposing and what does work is different than traditional programs. And there's counties, cities, states around the country that spend millions of dollars on youth justice programs, many of which are good. The other important thing to note here is because I've been in conversations where people have said, oh, that program then doesn't work. Well, wait a minute. It actually worked for 90% of the youth. This is a population of youth where that's not the right match program. Let's not throw the program out. We have to understand we need something a little more for these young people.
How long has this been percolating for you? Is this something that you always had a sense of as a subset, or has this emerged over time as incarceration declined and more youth were handled in the community?
I would say both. This is the answer. I'll try to be concise because I
Yeah.
have
It's a long form interview. Don't worry.
yeah, hey, there
Go,
you
go
go.
off. Go ahead.
I have both thought about this for a long time and in a number of ways, right? One is, why do For some young people, they get arrested once and never again. For other young people, they stay in the shallow end of the pool of delinquency, and different for others. To make that even more challenging, sometimes within a household, two brothers, one may have had some small challenges, small delinquency. The other is, as they say, way off the chain. Like, what's that thought process I've been on for 25 plus years. But what has emerged more recently, to your point, is as the total population of youth in the justice system has significantly reduced, you have this much more challenging population. And so, really trying to even parse that population, meaning who is just an annoyance to the system, so they keep going in, but maybe not a big public safety risk. Who is a public safety risk but is responding to traditional services? Then who is a significant public safety risk and they're not responding to services? So really, so I would say in the last few years, and a lot of that has, on top of my thinking about this for a long time, have been system leaders saying, this is what we're struggling with. And we don't have the tools right now to have a response.
Yeah, makes sense. So Vinny Schiraldi said in a panel discussion that you guys had recently at the National Council for Juvenile and Family Court Judges that as a general rule, and this is maybe one of the challenges here, is that standard risk assessments are useful in a way, but they're better at forecasting general risk rather than violence specific reoffending. Someone who scores high risk may be at high risk of a petty theft or a carjacking. Then I'm now quoting him, which doesn't help as much if one is focusing on curbing violence, which in turn causes more serious harm and drives policymaking in the field. I think I would quibble with him on putting petty theft and carjacking in the same sentence, by the way. I think a lot of people do not view having their most expensive product as like a petty thing. But yeah. I guess my question here, though, is do you guys think it is? I wasn't quite sure to take away like what the takeaway from that comment was. Do you think it is necessary in your kind of vision of this that's forming that we should develop a more specific validated screen to isolate and identify HR squared youth? Do you think that is a necessary component here of trying to align an array of services for them?
A process, yes. A tool, I think a tool would be great. I have a question about if a tool can ever happen. Let me give you a quick story. This is on the adult side, but it's true for youth to this point of, so what the truth is, standard risk assessments that are used in correctional agencies, probation departments, parole, corrections around the country, they assess the likelihood of recidivism, period, not the severity of that recidivism. And despite some of my colleagues who have been against risk assessments for a long time, the risk assessments actually have gotten better and better, right? So they are pretty good at assessing likely, putting an individual in a pool of people of either low, moderate, or high risk to recidivate, right? And that has gotten better and better. But what does not exist is distinguishing severity of recidivism. So, quick story: when I was the chief probation officer in Alameda County, where Oakland is, we were coming up close to having to renew our contract with a risk assessment provider, the companies that give you these risk assessments that you pay for, train staff. And I had a staff member come to me, a not reform-oriented staff member. He was a member of a task force, he was one of the few probation officers who were armed and embedded into a police unit. And he said, but we gave those probation officers people who had the highest risk on the risk assessment score. That was who were there in their caseload. And he was like, hey, chief, we have a problem. I have these two people on my caseload. They both score the same. One's a 45-year-old homeless, drug-addicted person. He used different words. Another is his words, a gangbanger, gun-toting 22-year-old. Yeah. And he said they both score the same. So that was interesting. It was great timing. Literally 2 or 3 days later, I had a call with the company and I gave them that story. And they said, yes, that's correct. The tool worked. They both have the same likelihood to recidivate. I said, you know what? You're right. One's going to steal from the store. One's going to shoot someone. I'd like to know the difference.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think that's why it's relevant what we're talking about here with the risk assessment is because, look, it's always not for everybody, I guess. I'll concede that. But for a lot of people, it's like, oh, well, we'll just get a tool that gets us closer to isolating these kids. But you're talking about, that could be a year and a half, 2 years, and a couple $1 million before you ever get to like, okay, cool. So now what are we going to do with them? So I guess that's what I was wondering is, can we get to in the imaginary world or hopeful world for you that somebody puts $50 million in your guys' hands and they're like, go do this. Does step one have to be this risk assessment part, or can we use the sort of, in your opinion, the characteristics you guys have marked and just say, okay, if you've gone through the existing risk assessment, we can just say, are these things true without really having some validated tool or what?
Yeah, and I will give you this report to share with the listeners. But let me tell you about what we did in Maryland. The
Yeah.
funny story is, I have always in my career, in addition to the youth justice work, have had this violence reduction initially thoughts, but then work. And Vinny has a funny line around David always did this other thing. He has sometimes called it fascist stuff because he's crazy.
Oh,
But
geez.
he was joking, obviously. But the point of that was this process by which we identify people as very high risk. Right. And so the funny thing is, when Vinny was appointed to be the Secretary of Juvenile Services in Maryland, he called me and said, "Hey, can you come do that thing you do here with us?" And so I actually think it turned out to be probably the biggest example of what we can do with this population. So on the assessment side of it, we came in, my data and research team, and we were able to receive this data because Vinny was the secretary from the state police department, 4.5 years of every youth arrested in the state of Maryland. So we were able to cut that a number of different ways. And we looked at from first arrest to when you were involved in a shooting, either a victim or a suspect. So a couple of quick things. One, only 2% of the, I think it was 20,000 youth in what we had after their first arrest went on 3 years later to either be shot or arrested for a shooting. Second is, we then looked at, for those small number of young people who were either victimized or a perpetrator in a shooting, what were their common characteristics? And there was overwhelming common characteristics similar to the ones I ran down before, but also type of arrest and number of previous arrests. And then we looked at the places in Maryland, Baltimore, Prince George's County, Anne Arundel County that have the highest number of these incidents. And we, based upon that, created a series of risk factors and created a process for the state of Maryland to identify young people going forward of how many of them have these series of risk factors, which these other youth had who had this bad outcome, and let's identify them, and then let's have early on intervention with those young people. And it's a small number of young people in each kind of county, and so it's very doable.
Are you a professional in the field of child welfare, juvenile justice, or other family and youth services? Subscribe today to Youth Services Insider, the imprint's exclusive section on all the insider news you need to stay in the know. Funding opportunities, major federal and state policy shifts, interviews with key leaders in the field. It's all available only for our Youth Services Insider subscribers. Sign up for a monthly or yearly subscription today by visiting imprintnews.org/subscribe. Our podcast listeners get 10% off their subscription by entering the promo code PODCAST10. That's imprintnews.org/subscribe and get 10% off your subscription by entering the promo code PODCAST10 today.
Of the kind of characteristics you guys have laid out and proffered as the defining characteristics here, the one that really strikes me as like very important, very more art than science to identify, and probably the most uncomfortable to talk about, is indifferent or hostile parents. That's because there's a lot of really great parents who want to work with whatever system or program wants to help their kid or intervene, right? The parents groups have been important in transforming and achieving a youth justice reform, like all over the country. In California, where you are, they basically got the ball rolling to shut down most of these prisons. And then on the other side, I think you guys use a sort of a good example in your policy brief of what the other side can look like, where it's like, we actually might have successfully intervened with this young man, had the mom in this case not iced you out, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So a couple of things here. One, it's ironic. I was just text messaging earlier today with that young man's former life coach, the one
Oh, wow.
the one he pulled a gun on.
Yeah.
Because but it's very interesting. I can't remember the profiles I specifically wrote because I literally know these young people.
Yeah.
And I can't remember if this part's in it. The life coach drops him off at the uncle's house, and the young man gets out. I was like, "Thanks, coach. Have a good day."
Yeah.
And it was like, what? And my take is from the story from the life coach is that young man wanted to stay with the life coach and was very stressed about the life coach dropping him off.
Yeah.
And it was in that discussion when he did,
Mhm.
again, not a usual way to express your desire to stay with someone, but hence that's what trauma does to the brain, and particularly younger people. And so this is an issue that I have, even the name of the report, HR squared, high risk, hard to reach youth, is an argument. But this notion of the families, to your point, sometimes it's uncomfortable. And I've decided that because my actual ideas and beliefs are pretty damn radical, that I am going to be honest in my discussions and writings, even when it offends some of my closest reform minded, progressive minded friends. Right. And so they want to come up with other language, youth of promise. I was like, I want to be descriptive. I want to be clear because I think the problem we have here is lumping all of these young people together, and it really messes our reforms up rather than say this is a small population. We're talking about in a mid-sized city, 20 to 30 young people. This is a small population
Yeah.
with extreme levels of risk and challenges. And yes, in these real examples, and we have more we can rattle off, are families who are really challenging, at best indifferent, sometimes worse, engaged and involved.
Yeah.
And now, that being said, we need support for the families as well. That's a huge issue in the field, is we can't just work with youth in isolation. We really have to support their families, but that's an additional resource that most systems, most programs don't have.
I think that's especially true when you're talking about the presence of pretty serious mental health and behavioral health things, because we see that on both systems that we cover
Yep.
at the imprint. Because we just did a whole series on relinquishment and parents who are just don't feel like they know what to do next and unsafe around their own kid, especially for their other kids. And yeah, it's a tough one to crack. And it's also going back to what I described as how somebody, I thought a lot in thinking through your guys' characteristics about the person who has to check the box. Are the parents indifferent and hostile or working with you? And that's a judgment call. It's how you interact with a parent. So that's like tough sledding, where the other
And
stuff is a little more apparent.
I think you don't make that assessment. You try to engage, and when that shows up, it's
Sure.
right. That's
Yeah. Yeah.
the piece of it. And the other thing is, I mentioned like my actual ideas. I happen to think that the entire youth justice system should be shrunken down to just this population. And even though we are pretty well, 75% reduction in youth incarceration in 20 years is remarkable, right? You mentioned the closure of the California state system. When I started doing this work a million years ago, I was going into what was then called the California Youth Authority every week to teach cognitive behavior intervention courses with young people inside. That there were 10,000 youth incarcerated in the California state system then. Today is zero. It doesn't exist. And those who have been diverted to county systems, that number is wildly small. And so incredible achievements, but there's still, my guesstimate is still about 20% of the youth justice population around the country is that we don't quote unquote need to be in the system. And when we can get down to just this population, and maybe more, we're getting down to this population would be a bigger cut, then we can focus in the way that we need to. And some unions are scared. We're not necessarily talking about smaller numbers of probation officers. We're talking about smaller cases, right? So that you can do better work. That's another longer discussion there, right? Because mostly what we're proposing is work by community-based organizations, but not alone, right? So there does need to be much better work on the part of youth justice systems as well.
Yeah. I think it does. One man's opinion of the atmosphere of the country, but I think where you guys are going with this, I would think would resonate with people that are truly invested in full decarceration of youth, because I think what you're really saying here is the public, politicians, policymakers will always want these kids locked up unless they have actual trust in the interventions that allow for that to not happen. Right.
I
And
mean,
if you don't have that, you don't wonder why we're just continuing to rely on this for some smaller group of youth than we used to.
you have a number of places that are proposing increasing capacity in youth facilities. You have some places that are proposing building new. We are at a pendulum shift moment, not just because of our federal administration, that's one part, but these are, hell, New York City is saying they need to build more facilities or at least increase capacity in some way or another. And the arguments there are reasonable, actually, right? But we hope that we can take measures where that is not necessary. But certainly we have this issue of narrative. And when you add to that the current piece around this youth takeover moment and some pretty horrible incidents of young people involved in violence, we still have a public who believes that most gun violence is committed by and against juveniles. That is wildly wrong, right? We're talking about less than 12% around the country, right? Most people think it's more than 50%. So we have a challenge, but hopefully I know that this podcast will be listened to by 100 million people and we
Absolutely.
will change hearts and minds.
On average, yeah.
But this is an issue that, and so we can't respond by just saying, oh, we just need to give them programs, nobody should be locked up. We have to be more mature in our both assessment and intervention in what a real challenge is.
I think it's an interesting time that this kind of comes about, in that I don't want to get too ahead of our reporting because we have some stories coming out on this, but even in some of these places where there's a call for more construction or more beds, it is happening at the same time as the very model of operation for facilities is being challenged by a willingness to work in them and who's going there to be trained.
So this is a big. So obviously we've got the total debacle and insanity of Los Angeles, and a progressive county, now a county that's massive, and we have youth facilities there, just one horror story after the other of abuse and neglect of youth. Yes, there's staff who will say, whoa, the story is about youth assaulting staff. And that story is real, but the whole operation has to be transformed. I was talking with folks in Texas about this report, the HR Squared report. And as a lot of people involved in this movement know, that despite it being Texas, historically, Texas made some good progress on youth justice reform. But in a few cities, Houston, Austin, there's been some high profile youth violence. Even though he's not juvenile, he's an 18-year-old accused of a carjacking and murder in Houston of a woman from Austin, and they're proposing a death penalty to this 18-year-old. And there are these high-profile incidents that are driving narrative, media, policy. And when you look at it, the data is not there to support it, right? I'm not trying to minimize horrible individual incidents at all. Those are real. But when you look at the data, a very small portion of the most serious crime is committed by juveniles.
The one that came to mind for me as we were talking about this is there was Kentucky. I actually think they have passed the money to build new detention centers. Meanwhile, the manager of the detention center is basically saying, we don't have enough people to run this one. And they're not trained. We are keeping kids in their pods for 20 hours, and that's why they're assaulting us, and vice versa. It's a problem.
It is a vicious, horrible cycle. And this, to finish this Texas story, there have been a number of pretty tough assaults on staff in Texas facilities. Just real horrible incidents, and those are real. And you have a combination of, there's staffing problems everywhere. Police departments are having challenges, but correctional agencies are having real challenges. And we need a number of things here. We need much better training. We need fewer youth in facilities so that they don't have to be as large. You don't need as much staff. But we do have to compensate these staff better as well. We have to make these jobs more meaningful and more attractive to people, because to your point, in Kentucky, you could build a building, but you have to have staffing, right? And if your response is to keep kids locked up for 22 hours a day, yes, when they get out, they're going to be furious and angry and release that rage. And so we really have this vicious cycle that we have to address properly.
Yeah, for sure. So we talked about the characteristics of the young people we're talking about. What would you say are the defining characteristics of a program you imagine is going to serve them well? And I know you guys list some examples of some existing programs. I'm guessing you're suggesting we could build off, but step away from that. Just say what are the things that a program is gonna have to do to connect with these kids? We're saying in the name are hard to reach.
Absolutely. I mean, in a phrase, specificity and intensity. So programs that are very specifically focused on this population. And I was talking to a jurisdiction the other day. They're spending millions of dollars on services like this, and they looked at their most challenging population, and only 8% of the most challenging population were enrolling in programs. So but the programs were achieving their contract objectives, meaning if I have a contract to serve 30 youth who are justice involved, and I get 30 youth, I'm achieving, but none of them are these high risk, hard to reach youth. Yeah. So that's why you have to say this contract is solely for this population of youth. So you have to A, identify them accurately, B, connect or have a program that is specifically focused on this population solely. And the services have to be much more intensive than our regular services. So we're talking about daily communication with the youth, 3 to 4 times a week, in person connection and time spent, and doing that for 6, 12, 18 months. And that is very unusual. That's not your usual community program. And that part of it doesn't have to be all of it, but part of it is somebody who has similar lived experiences, has credibility, right? Which some people call credible messengers. We often call life coaches, because it's not just a case manager. It's somebody, because the big thing is having a healthy and positive relationship with an adult in your life who you can trust. That is the biggest programmatic element that's important. Yes, education and housing and cognitive behavior and all these things are obviously very important. But at the core of what makes effectiveness is this intensive, positive, trusting relationship. And those are, and what we're talking about here is like what we say is a life coach should not have more than 8 young people on their caseload. So that my full-time 40 plus an hour week job is to focus solely on 8 young people, which means when they call me at 2 a.m, I have to answer. And I've got to see them, and I've got to be in their neighborhood, in their house, at their school. It is very intensive. And that is what we have found when it's structured right, funded right, right training, and accountability to the service provider. That is the most effective interventions for this population.
What does the training for the person that you just described look like? Because the CBT, the targeted clinical interventions, I'll be somebody else, but that person that's in their life, up in their face every day during this intense period, how do you train somebody well to do that? What are the skills you're looking for in a youth worker that would do that? It sounds very hard to do well.
It is. And I think that we don't acknowledge how hard it is. And talking about compensation, this is a population, a staff, a workforce that needs to be much better compensated, because we do a version of this in what's being called CVI today, community violence intervention. So street outreach workers and violence interrupters, and again, life coaches. And we need to take that model, which is still needing to be developed and improved and professionalized, that here, right? And that's, so for instance, we give a couple examples like the Maryland Thrive Academy, where a local organization in Baltimore called We Are Us, we're trained. So that training was a couple of fold. Starts off with the 2-day, all-day training on just A, understanding the population. B, this is what your actual function is going to be, to build a relationship, to build a rapport. Because case managers, or my job is to get you a job. No, your job is to have a positive and trusting relationship with this person. Your job is to spend time with them. And that sometimes is a mind shift in terms of what's my work duties. Your work duty is to develop a good relationship with this young person. All right. And then, so some of it is just this is what it is. Then it's how do you do it? The people that do it should have some level of credibility and lived experiences, so that they're bringing a lot to the table. But then we have to shape it. So motivational interviewing, so you shouldn't just go preach to the young person and say, you need to do this, that, and the other. How do you ask open-ended questions? How do you guide conversation? How do you spend time? Then also barriers, right? So you're not there smoking weed with the young person. You're not like you say, oh, I need to spend time with them. I had somebody argue this with me, literally. I need to go on the corner with them, smoke some weed so they see I'm down, build a relationship. Oh my goodness. And that's a no-no. So we also go over what are the best practices, what are the barriers you have to. And the other thing on the flip side, or maybe it's not the flip side, but people who have incredible passion and heart, they want to save everybody. They're taking youth home with them. Like, nope, that's also not the way to go. So a lot of that is in that training, and then quarterly refreshers, but also the supervisors really having to be trained. And so one of the things we do when we set programs like this up, you say supervisors, this should be obvious, but it does not happen in a lot of programs. Every month, you need to go out with your worker and observe them with one of the participants. So if you're a supervisor with 6 life coaches or whatever, credible messenger mentors on under you, you're doing that 6 times. You're doing it every month with everybody that's come the reports up to you to observe what's happening with the life coach and the young person. The other thing that I forgot to leave out about the characteristics is what we call relentless pursuit. This is a population that the first time you offer services to them, they're going to say, no, thank you. Or they're going to say, get the F out of my face.
Yeah.
And what we train folks on and what they have to be willing to do and do is come back the next day and come back the next day and then figure out who's their uncle, who's their grandmother, who's their friend. How can I get that? You actually have literally a plan of attack of how am I going to stay? Because a lot of these are young people who've been disappointed by so many programs that they don't even want, and they think, get the F out of my face. 99% of programs will then do that. Right. And so this is relentless pursuit. The last component is a financial incentive. And it is what it's called. The program isn't pay them. The program is positive and trusting relationship, build that relationship, help them make better decisions, right? But when you can incentivize them to engage, right, which we talk to the life coaches, that they might come for the incentive, but they need to stay for the relationship, right? And so the intervention or the theory of change on the transformation is relationship. That relationship will therefore give you influence. And when you have influence, you can help somebody make better decisions. And those better decisions lead to better outcomes.
Yeah.
But how do you get somebody who's really hard to reach and high risk? Initially, financial incentive, you selling who you are as an individual. You might be from their community, you might know their people that they know. But to your earlier point, John, is difficult. And it requires initial intensive training, refreshers, accountability from program supervisors, and documentation, right? There should be reports and case notes and all these things. It is much more structured than I think many people realize, or when it's not successful.
Last question that culminates all this to me is, what do you guys think happens next? You're in the early stages here. You're getting the brand out, get people talking about it. How would you like to see this kind of advance?
Yeah, we have a couple of small pilots that I think are going really well.
Oh, you do? Oh, you already have HR squared pilots?
But that is what Thrive Academy in
Okay.
Maryland was designed to focus on. So and it's going relative, still a small pilot for the most part, but going pretty well. In fact, we've recently asked the state of Maryland, they've had a transition in leadership. Vinny Schiraldi's not there anymore, but Betsy was great, who is the new secretary. I was talking to her recently. I was like, hey, let's try something. Let's go back in 2025 and look at every young person who was arrested or victimized by gun violence who were in the system. Did we identify them prior to that through this Thrive mechanism to see if our selection process is accurate? And so we're still in discussions of doing that. I'm hopeful that we can learn a lot from that. Now, the good thing off the bat is that the number is significantly reduced of even that population. Early indications that it was effective, and University of Pennsylvania, Anthony Braga's shop is evaluating it. So that's one. Two, in Indianapolis, we have something called the Youth Violence Reduction Initiative, very recently launched. We actually just had a press conference with the mayor there a few weeks ago launching it. And again, this is early on pilot, so we'll see. But we went through a similar process of identifying small. Indianapolis, much larger than most people think, is 900,000 people. And we identified 25 young people that we think rise to this level. So again, wildly small percentage. And deep engagement by an organization called Voices in Indianapolis. And they also provide services to families. And just quick note about this, one of their partner organizations that are working on this, who worked with justice-involved youth for years. He said in a meeting with us, "Oh my God, these youth are different." And we were like, "Yes, even though you've worked technically with this population for years, this is a much more challenging population, and hence why they normally just get ignored or simply incarcerated." Right? This is the young people who community-based organizations can't serve, who you have formerly incarcerated outreach workers are saying, "Oh man, we need to lock that young person up." So it is a difficult population, but some early on success in Indianapolis. So what do we need to do? I think systems need to continue to shrink. Again, we've done most of the shrinking, I have to say. And there's some jurisdictions where we've done all the shrinking, right? The young people left in them is this population. But that's not true everywhere. So we need to continue to do that. Do these assessments to determine what are the series of risk factors that make a young person at much heightened risk of being involved in more serious violence, and then have these resources, contracts with service providers focused solely on this and train them intensively to do it. It's not easy, it's doable, and we have this movement of let's just incarcerate these young people, even from some progressive jurisdictions. So we're up against headwinds, but also there's a lot of interest in this discussion. And I'll just say lastly, for instance, I was in Des Moines, Iowa, training all of the juvenile judges in the entire state of Iowa on this. This was just 2 weeks ago. And I was pretty surprised they had me, A, B, really responsive. In fact, I was very impressed with those judges. And they don't have a lot of this in Iowa, but the small handful that they do, they're flummoxed by, right? And so this was a room full of judges going through this. And so there is a lot of interest around this.
Once again, the phrase we're discussing today, the young people are high risk, hard to reach. If you want to read more about it, I will drop a link in the show notes to David and Vinny's policy brief on this. David Mohammed, Executive Director of the National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform. Thanks for joining us on the Imprint Weekly Podcast.
Thanks for having me, John. Really appreciate it.
Thanks to David Mohammed, founder and executive director of the National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform, for joining us today. The Imprint Weekly Podcast is a production of the Safe Camp Audio Network, which is a division of Fostering Media Connections. Please visit safecampaudio.org on the web or at Safe Camp Audio on all major social media. This podcast is produced and mixed by Christine Anjoko, with music by Luke Giroux and Cyrus Elia. If you enjoyed this episode, we would love it if you would consider subscribing or giving us a 5-star rating on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you download your podcasts. And we would greatly appreciate if you would consider supporting our work here on the podcast and in print. Small donations from our listeners and readers go a long way towards helping us grow and cover more great stories in child welfare and youth justice. To support us, it is very easy. Just go to imprintnews.org/donate. You can follow The Imprint on Twitter and Facebook by searching the handle @TheImprintNews, and visit us on the web at imprintnews.org. You can always get us over email at tips@imprintnews.org. I'm John Kelly, and we'll see you next week.